Welcome, friends, once again to Connect, our elder-to-elder conversations. And today, we investigate strategic planning, a skill of leaders.
Hey everyone, welcome to the E2 Effective Elders podcast. Visit us at e2elders.org and please share this good word with others.
Hey everyone, welcome to Connect, elder-to-elder conversations, and our thanks as always to CDF Capital for your outrageous generosity in elders across the country and around the world. E2 is thriving because of your investment in this ministry. And today also our thanks to Joe Moleski. Joe is a fellow elder up in southeastern Michigan. Joe, welcome to Connect, elder to elder.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I'm glad to be here.
Well, it's a real privilege that you said yes. We're so grateful that you did. I want people to know a little bit about you. And before we jump into strategic planning, why don't you give us a Reader's Digest about Joe Moleski?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Gary. So Joe Moleski, so that's me. I was born in Flint, Michigan. I am the middle child of five. My immediate family, I just celebrated 23 wonderful years with my lovely bride. My oldest son, Benjamin, who had just turned 18, just graduated from high school last week. My daughter, Hannah, she's 15, just graduated middle school today, actually. And I have a daughter named Tessa as well. So I'm very passionate about my faith, first and foremost, and then my family. I currently attend and serve as an elder at Berkley Community Church, where I've done that for the past 6 years. Also teach for Great Lakes Christian College in all of my spare time, right? Currently teaching 2 classes for them in the online format. And I really enjoy the spending time in God's creation, the outdoors, hunting and fly fishing specifically.
Yeah.
Also, in addition to that, I really enjoy using my skill set to help other organizations and churches specifically to get better at what they feel they're called to do.
Yeah, that's incredible. And for those who are joining us today, Joe is a Michigander, born and raised and still living in Michigan. And so I know that I'm not supposed to covet. That's one of the top 10 rules. Do not covet. But I certainly covet being back home again in Michigan, where it is God's country, no doubt about it, especially up north. So, hey, real quick now, everybody, remember 2021, our podcast is focused on the 6 challenges facing elders. And as we move through that acronym, E, evangelism, L, leadership. That's where we're landing today. L, leadership skills of elders. It's very challenging today to lead as an elder in this new era, so to speak. Joe's going to help us on the skill of strategic planning. Now, Joe's wrapping up a PhD and in particularly high levels of leadership. So, Joe, why don't you talk to us a little bit about strategic planning and what's the purpose behind it, please?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's kind of a loaded question, right? Because oftentimes people think of just planning as strategic when it's not necessarily that simple. But strategic planning is really an organizational process of defining a strategy or direction and making decisions based on allocating of resources, right? So where are you going to spend your equity as a church to pursue this particular strategy? And it may also extend into control mechanisms for guiding and the implementation of that strategy. And as you mentioned, Gary, the purpose of strategic planning is really twofold, right? Is to set your overall goals and then add to a development plan to achieve them, right? So it really involves stepping back from your day-to-day operations and asking the questions, where do you want your business or church to be headed in? And what should the priorities be?
Yeah.
So as we think about the different levels of leadership, we have a lot of good leaders in our churches, and sometimes our churches have, let's say, some opportunities to get better in their leadership, right? So there's really 3 different levels of leadership, and you really could think about this in 3 simple questions: what, how, and why, right? So the what is the operational. So operational leaders really revolve around the day-to-day task of running, let's say, a Sunday morning service, or training small group leaders, or those simple tasks that would happen in the everyday running of a church. Tactical leadership is really about the process and how the individual parts integrate in the church to achieve what you want to be your strategic outcome. Right. And then strategic leadership or strategic planning is really all about systems thinking, right? So how are all the different ministries in your church going to align to the vision and the mission of what God has called you specifically as a church to accomplish?
Now, would you say that what you just differentiated are different types of leadership thinking, or is that more different leadership styles?
I would say that that's more different type of leadership thinking, right? So the different styles are more, or methodologies would be more closer to like a servant leadership, of a servant leadership style, as opposed to the operational, tactical, strategic, right? Everybody has the ability to do operational, tactical, strategic leadership and thinking, regardless of their style. However, where we get caught up most of the time, because we just simply don't know any better, right, is in the operational swim lane. We're so caught up in the day-to-day of leading and trying to make things work, we don't really have the time necessarily to go tactical into that final level of the strategic.
Yeah, a lot of elders find it very easy to get down in the weeds. Many times that's the way that we work, whatever we do vocationally. It may be that we're down in the weeds, and elders, even one of our names in Greek is episkopos, meaning overseer. So strategic thinking would compel us to get out of the weeds and get up into higher elevation so that we can see strategically over the direction that the church needs to take.
That's a really, really good point, Gary. And I think what you said something really, really important there. And sometimes it is because of a lack of resources that we have on our leadership team, whether it's a paid vocational staff at the church, or it's lay leaders, right? But sometimes either we don't have the time, or we don't know how to do it, or we get caught, like you said, we get caught in the weeds. And it's really just taking a step back, and it really comes down to trust, right? Do we trust our people to be able to let them lead their ministries, right?
Yeah, empowering them. Absolutely. That's real leadership, is empowering people to lead, to use that leadership gift.
That's absolutely right.
It may be that you've heard of Simon Sinek and his landmark book, Start With Why. And I say many a time that his book, Start With Why, is in the top 10 books that I have read in my lifetime. It's not a Christian book, obviously, but the principles in it are very powerful for Christian ministry. Now, I want to start with why. Could you, someday soon, Dr. Moleski, could you tell us why strategic planning is so very important? Why should elders pursue this skill?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I love Simon and all of his work. In fact, I'm one of his followers and many different things, right? So he's one of the heroes in what I do for a living vocationally. But So why is such a huge and such a powerful 3-letter word, right? But the why is important is because it allows us, the most important thing is really to tie what we're going to do, what we need to do to accomplish those things that God has asked us to do based off of the vision and the mission of what we want, what God has asked us to do. But it absolutely, first and foremost, all of the strategic planning in terms of the church is absolutely nonsense compared to what God has asked us to do, right? And if I love that you started out, prayed earlier with us about Proverbs 16, right? If we got to make sure that we are aligned to what God is asking us to do, and we'll talk a little bit further about that as we get further down to hear this discussion.
But we need to start with why. Well, let's take that simple 3-letter word why, and let's change it to another simple 3-letter word, who. Who do you think should be involved in strategic planning in the local church?
Yeah, in the local church. So absolutely. So it absolutely has to start with the elders, right? But it can't stop there, right? So it's really got to be your paid staff and your leadership of your ministries, who may or may not be on your elder board, or may not be as a part of your paid staff. But they absolutely have to be involved in the process, not necessarily about the actual strategic plan.
Okay. Would you invite other people to the table in addition to the elders?
Yeah, I think for sure. I think whoever, I don't know if you're familiar with the word stakeholder. Yeah. Right. But anybody who has a stake in what's happening within that particular ministry absolutely should be involved with the strategic plan.
So what, in your thinking, Joe, how many are too few and how many are too many in a strategic planning process?
So, the old adage, right? If you want to kill something, give it to a committee, right? I think the strategic plan needs to probably stay with the elder group and in the paid senior staff. But as you communicate that, you definitely need to get buy-in from the rest. So I don't know if I could put a number on it per se, but you definitely want to keep it to a select few, and maybe not even the entire elder group, right? So obviously you have different skills on the elder board, and maybe some of the folks on the elder board just need to be bought into that particular plan.
Right. When we process a 3-year strategic plan with a local church, we often say to elders, now, if this breathes life into you, we want you there. But if this is tedious, burdensome, just delegate the authority to your fellow elders that they would do this on your behalf. And obviously you will affirm what they come up with. And then again, staff, pastoral staff we want there. And what we have found over the years is that when we are fewer than 8 people, it is painfully laborious. When we have more than 18 people in the room, it is incredibly complicated. So a sweet spot for us when we get elders who love doing this, when we have staff who are energized by this and the Holy Spirit is moving powerfully, a sweet spot is right around 12 for us when we facilitate.
Yeah, I certainly don't want to challenge your expertise in the church, but I would think about it from a business standpoint, right? So if you're talking about the planning process, who is directly, what is directly upstream from that process? So what group or ministry, and what group is directly downstream from that process, right? So I would say have the leadership team from whatever process you're working on, somebody from the upstream and somebody from the downstream, and then you can really understand how the whole system works together.
Right. And that those individuals are in the room, and it typically takes us 10 to 12 hours to facilitate something. So we're together for a couple of days. Hey, why don't you talk to the issue of, is this even biblical? Is this corporate pie in the sky kind of stuff, or should we be doing this in the local church?
Yeah, that's a great question. So fundamentally, I guess what we really want to understand: do we have a biblical foundation for the concept of strategic planning, or like you said, does it have? It's something that we've taken from the secular business world and just plugged it in to our church or ministries. Really the question becomes, again, why, right? Does God honor the process of strategic planning? And I think I have a few examples that I'd just like to talk to, a couple of at the high level, and one we'll drill down to a little bit specifically. But so two at a very high level, we're going to talk about Moses, right? So as all of you probably know, if you're on the E2 podcast listening, Moses, as the Old Testament example, he really kind of struggled as a leader early in his tenure as a leader, right? So, but what he did, though, is he learned through some time with God and his mentors, right? Specifically his father-in-law, Jethro, to think and lead strategically. A couple of examples of that is that he used the word delegation of work to use manpower more effectively. And it could be argued that sending spies into the land of Canaan was also a strategic move on his part to really understand what was happening there before they kind of moved in, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's my Old Testament example. And then the Apostle Paul, right? Nobody can argue that he was an integral cog in the establishment of what we know as the early church today. He had a strategy, right? So the Apostle Paul chose key cities in which to establish his early churches. The example, there's tons of examples, but the example really for this presentation is the church that he planted in Ephesus, right? It was currently we know as the gateway to Asia Minor, right? So everybody had to come through Ephesus, and typically what some churches do now is that they allow people to come to them as opposed to going reaching out. We can argue about that strategy later, but what Paul did is that he planted that church in Ephesus because people were coming through that city in droves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So the other example that I want to go through is, and we'll tie it directly to strategic leadership principles, was the biblical example of Nehemiah, right? So there's several, 5 different things that I want to go through that are really specific to what a Christian leader should be or think or execute as they go through their strategic leadership or planning process. So the first one is prayer, right? Nehemiah asked God for discernment. So at the heart of Christian leadership is the communication between God and the leader, right? So we absolutely make sure that is the foundational aspect of anything that we do as a Christian leader, right? And before even we provide a vision or we're casting vision for our church, prayer is first. But the next step is really to provide a vision. So Nehemiah had his vision in mind. He clearly communicated that to others, right? And that's a big thing that we need to do as leaders is to communicate every step of the way, right?
Yes.
And the vision helps direct followers towards a common goal and empowers them with knowledge that they form a vital component to accomplish that goal. So another piece is, this sounds bad, but it's not, right? You need to leverage power. In terms of Nehemiah, right? Nehemiah's position as the royal cupbearer to the king allowed him the ability to exercise his influence or lead through influence. Is huge in today's society, right?
Very huge. Yep.
So
I think that we might call that networking.
Absolutely, 100%, right? Effective leaders make use of all the sources of power and influence to deal with the myriad of situations they face. And we also need others to handle things that we can't necessarily or don't have the expertise to do so. So the next piece is adaptability, right? The best leaders today, even taking a note from Simon Sinek's book, right? The best leaders adapt well to change into opposition.
Yes.
And so that is huge. And the way that Nehemiah did that is that he listened to his people, and Nehemiah stayed abreast of the changes and adapted readily and effectively. And finally, perseverance, right? Nehemiah persevered with a vision of the reconstruction by requesting a leave of absence from his duties. He was also very, very tied into what was happening with the Jews and how they are complaining with their, about that situation, right? So what we need to do is while we may stop trying to reach a goal when trouble arises occasionally, those who persevere continue on in order to see a commitment through to completion, like Nehemiah did with the Great Wall.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are outstanding points from the story of Nehemiah. In my leadership development classes in seminary, I would always require students to read the book of Nehemiah and identify the many leadership nuances that are found in that book. You know, when you and I look at the Bible, we would shout out to the elders, strategic planning is in the Word of God. The world of business obtained it from the Bible. We did not obtain it from the world of business. You know, we've been made in the image of God. It's clearly stated in Genesis chapter 1. And when we look at Genesis 1 in creation, you talk about a strategic plan. That is off the chart, and we've been made in the Creator's image. We should be strategic in our thinking and planning. Even before God said, "Let there be light," 1 Peter tells us that Jesus was chosen before the foundation of the earth was laid. So before God even said, "Let there be light," a plan was in place, a strategy for the saving of our souls. And, you know, I love the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. He had to have a plan, build storehouses because he was farming every available acre of ground, develop an accounting system to distribute this grain, to keep people alive. You talk about a strategic plan. Even Jesus, the Holy Spirit's going to come on you, then you're going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. You talk about a strategy. It's cover to cover in the good book.
Absolutely. There's a ton of examples. Obviously, in the 20 minutes we have allotted for this podcast, we couldn't go through all of them, but it absolutely chock full, right?
Well, but you know what? I want to ask you, because this is so very important as a leadership skill. What if, because we are running out of time here, but we're not running out of content. What if we pick up next week at this point, and maybe you unpack for us some of the dangers, some of the risks, maybe even some of the methods by which to develop a strategic plan. Would you be willing to do that?
Absolutely, Gary. That would be my pleasure to do so. So I can go through how to execute a strategic plan at a high level, right? Because I don't know your church. I don't know everybody who will listen to this, but absolutely. So we can go through at a high level on how to execute this strategic plan and some of the pitfalls that we might fall into. Yeah,
let's do that. So next week, everybody who's listening and or watching, we're going to do part 2. We're going to look at execution model strategies, but as well, what are some of the pitfalls of which we need to be aware? That'd be great. Well, Joe, thank you very much, not only for these insights on strategic planning, but thank you for serving as an elder. You are in the trenches there in the local church, and for that, we truly do give you thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Gary.
All right, so next week it is. Thanks, buddy.
Appreciate it.